Good morning. This is Daniel Dolphin, your host, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin, owner of Dolphin Horsemanship, and it is my privilege today to talk with Mr. John Harrer, the originator of the Whoa podcast about horses and horsemanship. John, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Dan. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, no problem. Your podcast was the first one I was ever a guest on. So you're kind of responsible for the madness that I'm in the middle of right now. So I thought I had to have you on.
Well, you did a great job on my podcast, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you. Well, we start everything out with the lightning round icebreaker questions. So how about we jump right into those?
Sounds good. I'm anxious to get a grade.
Okay. I'm going to have to start writing these down and remember what numbers I'm giving people and so forth. What is your favorite way to relax?
Tinkering. I have a little wood shop out back, and I do a little woodworking, but I'm good at tinkering around the house.
Any particular types of projects? You build furniture or knickknacks, or what's your woodworking area?
I'm just a basic woodworker. Don't ask me to build anything that's square because I can't do it, but I can put a couple of things together, and I like to make boxes that wobble when you set them down on a table, but there's always those little rubber pads you can put at the bottom to even them out. So I use those a lot.
Perfect. While I'm thinking about it, my DVD is guaranteed to straighten out a table that is wobbly by about the thickness of the DVD.
I'll keep that in mind.
Morning or evening?
You know, I used to be an evening person, but I've forced myself to wake up early so many days that now I would consider myself a morning person. And I do find that the mornings are far more productive for me, and I get most of my creative ideas early in the morning.
Me as well. I used to play, I love playing Sudoku on my phone, and I will very commonly play that as I go to sleep, and I'll get bogged down in one. And then when I wake up in the morning, I can solve it easily. So that's my little litmus test of my brain definitely works better in the morning than at night.
Yeah.
Bay or sorrel?
Well, I have a sorrel, so I'm going to have to go with that.
Okay. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
This is a kind of a controversial question. I've listened to your show, Dan, and I'm a Californian. And I say that you want to use it kind of like the Olympics. Pineapple's okay about every other year or so, but that's about the maximum.
Don't make a habit of it. Okay.
That's right.
Do you have a specific horse-related pet peeve?
I would have to say that when I see people leading their horse by the clasp of the lead rope, it just drives me bonkers.
That's a good one. Yeah. What is your favorite beverage?
I like a nice Slane Irish whiskey on the rocks, and I have one every Sunday night, so I keep it kind of special.
Okay. Very nice. So you like the PD smoky type stuff or what?
No, actually, I like it more clean. I don't like the Scotch whiskey. I like the Irish whiskey, and this is a small batch whiskey, and it's got some really good notes to it.
Okay, cool. Tell us something unexpected about you.
Well, most people don't know that I'm a very shy person, yet I keep putting myself in situations where I have to kind of like this. And one of the biggest things I did is in the 1980s, I trained Frisbee dogs. And I was one of 8 teams to perform in front of 80,000 people at a 49ers New York Giants football playoff game at Candlestick Park. That was almost as scary as this, Dan.
Well, Well, that's pretty neat. I haven't done this intentionally, but it seems like most of the guests I'm picking are people with dog training backgrounds. That's interesting. I've always found that people that train dogs get along very well with horses. There seems to be a bridge there that a lot of the things you have to deal with in teaching most people about horses, dog people just bypass 80% of it straight away. Works out very well.
I've noticed that a lot of your guests have had dog training. And a couple weeks ago, I think it was Claire from France. She was talking about it. And I kind of agreed with hers that I initially found training dogs and then trying to move to horses to be very frustrating because I thought I was pretty handy at training a dog, but I tried to translate that to a horse and it just didn't work out. So when she was telling the story about her Malinois and then going to horse training, I could really relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
But once I got away from thinking like that I trained a horse the same way as a dog, then I was able to move forward pretty quickly.
It's the swapping from species that's the issue. I kind of always felt like, particularly with all the psychology and philosophy stuff that I study, that it should translate very readily to my kids. But I bumble through fatherhood just like I bumbled through the first 20 years of training horses, making all these mistakes. I guess you just have to ruin a few before you get to where it's smooth and polished and you can see the road a little more clearly. What superpower would you choose?
Superpower. Well, when I was a younger man, it probably would have been invisibility for strictly purient reasons. But now that I'm older, I hate traffic. And so I think maybe flying like Superman would be a great superpower to have.
I'm with you. Are you more of a thoughts person or more of a feelings person?
Yeah, I think thoughts. I keep grinding at a problem, and if I can't solve it, I just keep looking at it from different angles until I figure it out. And if I feel myself getting frustrated with, which is an emotion, I'll usually take a break. And kind of like what you talked about with the Sudoku is that take a break and then come back to it again. And a lot of times those answers will just naturally pop back into your head. So I thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related tool?
Yeah, my very first tool was the Clinton Anderson halter, lead rope, stick and string. And I got those before I even owned a horse. The stick and string taught me a lot as a novice, and I like that halter. I have that first halter and lead rope that I bought 15 years ago, and I use it almost every day. So I really like the Down Under Horsemanship stuff. They make really good products.
Okay. Do you have a favorite book or movie?
Yeah, my favorite, I don't read a lot. I'm not a real strong reader, but I'll read any Sherlock Holmes novel or short story. I like the way he taught me how to deductively reason. And then as a movie, I really like it's an old Warren Beatty movie called Heaven Can Wait. And I think there's a good storyline there that when you're ahead of the game, just take care of your assets. And I really like the message that movie gave.
Okay. What is your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur. I would have to say, seems probably obvious, but I like the T-Rex. Big body, small hands. I think that guy's pretty good, and he eats anything he wants, so can't go wrong there.
I was actually having a discussion with my youngest son, bringing him to school this morning. We were talking about dinosaurs. A couple of facts that popped into my head. I think one of my favorite dinosaurs is the crocodile or the alligator because they survived all that stuff and they're still
Oh,
around today. And did you know that genetically speaking, a crocodile is more closely related to a chicken than they are a snake?
no way.
Yeah, it really seems it seems odd. And if you take a chicken and you pluck it, like you're harvesting chickens and you pluck them, and you stand them up on their feet, that's a dinosaur. I mean, they have the scaly legs, the eye pupils, the whole 9 yards. And like we have free range chickens out here, those are the huntingest things. There's any kind of lizard, frog, grasshopper, that thing is in very big danger around here.
Th-
So,
That's pretty
you know,
amazing. I hadn't thought about it like that, but the way you described it, and I hadn't thought about a crocodile or an alligator being as part from the dinosaur age, but those
mhm,
guys live to be, 100 years old, don't they?
they do. Yep. And they've been around a long, long time. I mean, they're survivors. And I think, but they lay eggs just like chickens do. And then feathers are made of keratin, which is the same thing the scales are made out of. It's believed that feathers evolved from scales. So anyway, little interesting tidbit from my morning drive to school.
You're a fountain of knowledge, Dan.
Found a useless information is how most of my friends and family pose it. But anyway, and have you ever had a UFO encounter?
I have not. Not
Okay.
in reality. Some probably in my dreams, I think. But those were the 70s, and so I don't think they count.
Watch out for the mushrooms behind the barn. All right. I'm going to give you 123 points,
Whoa,
which
wow. I
that,
think that's a new
that gets
record.
us into that is. So you are eligible for a coupon for 50% off of a unicorn valid wherever unicorns are sold. So we'll get that coupon in the mail to you today.
Great. I'll plug my zip code in to find the nearest unicorn dealer near me.
Very good. All right. So you are in Bakersfield, California, correct?
Correct. Yep. Central Valley.
Are you born and raised, or are you a transplant there? Or
I was born in Los Angeles, Whittier, actually, and I'm 67 years old. We moved here when I was 10.
and Bakersfield is a fairly rural part of California. Is that? I mean, the town itself, I guess, is a decent sized town, but it's not like LA where you're just inundated with people out there.
It's the county's about 350,000 people, and it is congested in the town areas. When we moved to our house here, about 7 miles south of downtown Bakersfield, it was fairly rural that we were surrounded by a lot of farmland, but housing has kind of encroached. We used to be able to ride in that farmland, and it's pretty difficult now for us to maneuver around the housing projects.
We're in kind of the same shape, but we still have the agriculture, so they have to put up with people in these little subdivisions pulling out in front of tractors and things like that now. It's a wonder that more people haven't been killed doing that kind of stuff. They just don't seem to get, or 18 wheelers full of sugarcane, like
Yeah,
they can stop on a dime.
yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? You had the dog training. What did you? I guess you're semi-retired now. What was your career in, and how did you turn into podcasts and all that kind of stuff?
Well, when I moved back to Bakersfield, I worked with my father for 13 years at an oil field machine shop. We were partners there. I enjoyed it very much, and working with my dad was really a very special time for me. But right across the street, there was a health food store, and I was kind of altering my lifestyle to become more healthy. I walked over to the man across the street and I said, "Hey, I'm not going to be in this machine shop all the rest of my years. How do you start a health food store?" And he said, "Well, John, I'm about ready to retire. You can buy this store if you like." So we did. We put our house on the line and we bought the health food store downtown. My wife ran the health food store while I worked in the machine shop during the day, and then I would go over there and do all the shelf stocking and cleaning and general maintenance at night. I did the machine shop for 15 years. Concurrently, the health food store, we ran that for 30 years and retired in 2013. I thought I was going to be a journalist in the horse industry. I found out that was much more difficult to try and get into than I initially had planned, although I did get my very first job. I closed the store on a Friday after 30 years, and on Monday we drove to Colorado for the first Australian camp draft competition that was sanctioned in the United States. Covered that for the Australian Stock Horse Society. And I started the podcast in 2012, which was the early days of podcasting. As a matter of fact, a lot of people didn't know what a podcast was. So I tried to get a guest on and they'd go, well, what the hell is a podcast? And who are you? Because nobody knew who the heck I was. So that's pretty much the short end of it.
Just so you know, that's been my experience as well. The same two responses: what is a podcast and who are you? So that's still going on. So when did you get into horses? Obviously, 2012. If you were already thinking of journaling.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. When you called and asked me to be on the show, I knew you were going to ask about my history with horses. When I started thinking about it, we moved to Bakersfield here when I was 10 or 11, and I had a newspaper route. For the kids out there, they used to have these little paper things that you would roll up and throw on people's porches every morning, so they'd get up to their morning coffee and have to read the paper instead of on their iPad. And I would get up at 4 in the morning and deliver papers on Monday and Wednesday for a whole whopping $12 a month. But because I was new to Bakersfield, I didn't have a lot of friends. I found a stable that was about 3 miles away that I could ride to on my Stingray bicycle. And I would go down there in the summertime and rent a horse for an hour. This would give you a little bit of a idea of what times were different back then, is that I walked into the stable and I said, hey, I want to rent a horse. And he says, do you know how to ride? And I said, yes. He says, it's $8 an hour. And he says, I'll saddle up a horse for you, but I don't want you going any longer than an hour. So, okay. And don't run the horse on the way back. Okay. I hadn't been on a horse before, other than the ponies that you go around and around in a circle. Mm-hmm. So I got on this horse and I could ride along the Kern River all by myself. There was nobody out there. I would ride for an hour and not see another soul on the river. And then I look at my watch and I would ride out for 40 minutes and then go, oh crap, I got to get back. So I would trot and lope the horse. And the horse was perfectly willing to do it. He was a stable horse and he knew exactly where he was going. He would rush back to the stables. He would come back all sweaty. I didn't know anything about horses, nothing. And I don't know how I steered him. I don't know how I made him go or stop or anything. I couldn't make him stop on the way back because we got back, they were sweaty. The big old burly guy would yell at me. The next month I'd come back with my $8 and he'd saddle up a horse for me again. And I'd go out and I'd do the same thing. And he'd yell at me again. And I'd say, hey, let me bathe the horse. Let me dry him off. Whatever you want me to do, I'll work for here. He said, no, get out of here, kid. So he finally ran me off. I was probably a smart ass kid. And I didn't have much to do with horses after that until my wife and I got married in 1981. And she wanted a horse. So we found this place south of Bakersfield. It's a half an acre. And she bought this thoroughbred quarter horse cross. And as a foal. So I built some pens out of oil-filled machine pipe, brought Vandy home, and he was untrained and he was a yard ornament for a long time. And when she would ride, naturally you could guess what happened is that and she came off a couple of times. So I kind of avoided that situation altogether. And I was into golf and tennis and mountain biking and anything else that I could do other than the horse. I was in charge of input and output, I say. Hay in and manure out. That was my distinct charges. In 2004, we got TiVo, and as part of that package, they had RFD TV. They had Ken McNabb, they had Richard Winters, they had Richard Shrake, Craig Cameron, Chris Cox, Clinton Anderson, John Lyons, all these guys. And I was watching these guys going, oh my goodness, I'd been trying to work with horses the wrong way. And I just devoured these shows. I just loved them. Fast forward a little bit, Renee's horse, my wife is Renee, her horse dies at the age of 25. And she knew it was coming, so she had been putting $100 a month away for a couple of years. And she goes out and she gets another horse, a grade quarter horse gelding named Dusty. And this guy, at the time, we had the store. And so she would take off in the afternoon and go for a ride. I'd close the store up. And then, well, she goes home to ride Dusty. And I get a call from the neighbor that she's come off Dusty. And I go, oh my goodness. So I go home. She's got a bump on her head. She said that some kids were playing with this big piece of tin and it scared Dusty and he spun and she came off. So I said, okay, well, you're not riding him for a while. She goes, well, he's got to be ridden. He's, a 9-year-old quarter horse. I said, okay, well, if he needs to be ridden, I'll ride him. And she looked at me and she said, you haven't been on a horse in the 25 years we've been married. I said, yeah, but I've been watching these shows. I think I can handle it. And I rode when I was 11. And I started riding Dusty around, and in 3 weeks she was back. And, that was kind of the end of my horse career until our neighbor who keeps their horse behind our property, we trailered out someday for a ride, and she's getting ready to mount her horse, and the horse is moving around. I'm telling her that, hey, don't let that horse move around while you're mounting up. And she's looking at me like, get the hell out of here. What are you, some kind of expert now? And I said, well, I know that a horse isn't supposed to be walking around while you're trying to mount him. And she says, just leave me alone. So I said, okay. And she steps into her stirrup, horse moves. She comes down on her knee and she cracks her kneecap. So later she says, John, if you want to work my horse while I'm healing up from this cracked bone, it's 8 weeks and you're welcome to work Charlie. Oh man. So I got me a stick and string from Clinton. I got me a cowboy hat and I got me a halter and lead rope. And every morning, 6 a.m., I was out there working Charlie, and I got to ride him for 8 weeks. And about week 6, she calls me up. She says, hey, the doctor says I'll be cleared to ride again in 2 weeks. I'll need my horse back, he was just right out back. She saw him every day. And I said, oh my goodness, I kind of like this kind of stuff. And I turned to Renee and I said, I think I need to get me a horse. So I did. And I got a horse that I made some mistakes buying him. He was a good horse, his gelding, about the right age, 8 or 9. Worked him for about a year. He showed up lame about a month after I got him, but I still continued to work him. I didn't know any better. And it turned out he had navicular pretty bad in both of his front feet. And the vet said, probably best just to put him to sleep. So I kind of took that as a lesson and in buying horses and trusting the people you buy them from. And I went out and got me a foundation quarter horse mare that hadn't been worked too hard, had 90 days training on her, and I went to work on her. And we've had a pretty darn good relationship for the last 15 or 16 years. Her name's Jessie. For the podcast, I covered a local event here called the Vaquero Heritage Trainers Challenge. They have a herd of wild Mustangs in Tehachapi. And we were in a big drought in 2014 and 2015. So this herd had grown to about 115 horses, all black. And they had a little Mustang makeover event to try and bring public awareness to adopt some of these horses out because the land just wasn't going to support them. The following year, there was talk early in the year that they weren't going to have it because they didn't have enough trainers. And I'd kind of fallen in love with the thought of a wild herd of horses. And I said, if you don't have enough trainers, I'll go ahead and I'll get a horse and I'll try it. So I did. And I got a little black horse that we called Scratch. He was a 10-year-old gelding. He was in the herd for 7 years. They brought him out, gelded him.
I was going to actually ask you about the Mustang makeovers and all of that stuff. Does I understand that that is a pretty formative part of your journey, correct?
That is, yeah. The Carroll Heritage Trainers Challenge was really one of those turning points. And to take that horse that hadn't been touched at all and try to make a horse out of him was really pretty challenging. And I'm not afraid to admit that I made a ton of mistakes with Scratch.
Mm-hmm. I've always had some mixed feelings about those deals because I have to say, in my heart of hearts, I do not think most people have any business working with a Mustang. It's kind of a baptism by fire sort of a thing for sure, as I'm sure you learned.
You're absolutely right.
But you seem to have survived it.
I did. It was one of those experiences in life that you look back on and you go, man, that was pretty amazing. And what the hell was I thinking at the same time?
Some of life's best experiences start that way. The part of it I'm always afraid of, it's a very common thing where people start off with more horse than they really need. And I would say it's a pretty low percentage of people that come out of the other side of that and stay in the horse world. I think most of them are probably soured to it, or their spouse now has issues with it, or something, and they leave and we never see them again. But why don't you tell us some of your experiences there? So you got Scratch. I'm assuming it was through a lottery type of a deal, or were you able to pick him out, or what?
We drove back onto this private property where the herd is being managed, and it was really an amazing sight. Driving 5 miles down this dirt, dusty road, there were 8 of us at that competition. And we came around the corner in the last half mile, and you look off to your left, and running along the foothills was this herd of all black horses. It was just right out of a movie. It was amazing. We got to the catch pens, and they had horses set up for us, and we got a draw. There were 8 of us, and I got draw number 8. Now, the horses that they caught were mostly, there were some geldings, but most of them were mares. And by the time I got to pick, there was only 2 geldings left, this older one that I ended up having, and then everything else was mares, and most of the mares were pregnant. And I'd convinced my wife that I would train a horse and then sell him at the end of the competition. But we weren't looking to get 2 horses for the price of 1. So I had to pick Scratch. He was, like I said, he was 10. And it was a pretty amazing experience to just have them run him up in a chute. And they said, once he's in your trailer, he's yours. He breaks a leg, you fix it. He breaks your trailer, we don't care. He's yours. That was June. Come back in October and you can show us what you've taught him.
So how did you start that? Do you have a round pen, or you started in a stall, or what was the beginning for you?
We had our half acre, and I didn't have any arenas that were accessible to me. So I pretty much started him. I built a 30-foot round pen in my backyard and worked him in there. The biggest mistake I made, Daniel, is I had learned all this stuff from Clinton Anderson about using the snaffle, and the challenge was a vaquero type challenge, and I decided instead of using a snaffle bit to start him, I'd use a hackamore. It was my hubris that kind of got in the way. I really should have stuck with what I knew, but I thought, I could learn the hackamore at the same time as I'm learning how to break this horse. And that was the biggest mistake I made, because once he figured out he could run from that hackamore, run through that, I had lost him. So I had to work 3 times as hard as I probably would have, as I look back on it, as I probably would have had to.
Did you happen to keep track of hours spent with him throughout that?
I did not, but I spent, here's a funny story. So we live under an air park. There's a landing pattern, and planes fly over all the time. And I was ready to ride him. I had him saddled. He was dead broke to the saddle. I had him calm as it could be. My groundwork had worked out well. I saddle him up. I put my foot in the stirrup. I swing it over. And I hear in the background, I hear this plane coming in as a landing pattern, which I hear all the time. So, you kind of, oh yeah, it's just a plane, but you don't even acknowledge it because it happens so frequently. And my butt cheeks hit that saddle, and that plane was directly overhead and backfired as he was slowing down. And Scratch went, "What the heck?" Because it was such a small round pen, 30 feet, I just was able to step off. But he kind of bucked around that 30-foot round pen without me on him. And that was one of the first times he bucked. He didn't buck when I first put the saddle on him. It was kind of tough trying to get back on him again after that.
Was it tough for him or was it tough for you? Was that more of an internal struggle or did he stay rattled on you?
It was more for me. So I went back, started again on the groundwork, went through all the stuff that I'd gone to. And then I got an experienced horseman to help me with them. My farrier's really good. He used to be a professional bull rider. "Why don't you let me ride him for you?" And I said, "No." I said, "This is my deal. I signed on for it. If anybody gets on his back, it'd be me." He says, "Well, let me be in the round pen with you so I can direct his feet." And I said, "Sure." So I did. I got on him and we did the round penning with me on him doing some, I was folding him back and forth, and he did pretty good there. And then I was lucky enough, the local stables, I talked to the manager there, and I was able to use our arenas. So every day for the last 2.5 months that I had Scratch before the competition, I would trailer him probably 6 days a week, trailer him out to Rancho Rio, work him in the arena. And he was really frightened on the trail. Place where the herd was part of the Pacific Crest Trail, and there were hikers that were up and down that trail, and the horses learned to become frightened of them. So he would see somebody walking along the trail I was riding on, and he would just bolt and take off with me. And that was probably the biggest problem that I had to fix with him is bolting. He wasn't trying to get me off. He was just afraid. And
that's interesting because like when I think Mustang, I'm thinking blank slate. And then in reality, you have a horse that has a prior condition response that you have to deal with. And that to me would have been something kind of unexpected, So that's interesting. That's a few years in the past. Where are you with Scratch nowadays?
We're doing pretty well. He is a little bit slow and a little bit lazy, as Mustangs generally are. He doesn't see much reason to go loping circles in an arena, but he's a pretty good trail horse. He hasn't taken off on me for a while. They have allowed e-bikes on the trails that we generally ride on now, and those do scare him. He took off on me about 1.5 years ago, but he doesn't go nearly as far as he once did. He used to run for 2 or 3 minutes, and now it's just about 50 yards, and he turns around and checks on things.
Well, very good. And he was also sort of what initially started you videoing and podcasting. Is that correct? You were, before we had technical difficulties, you were alluding to doing some reporting on this Mustang deal. So is he really what started the podcast for you, or was that prior to him?
It was prior to him. So in 2012, I was looking for ways to chronicle my experience. And as I mentioned, I was really into Down Under horsemanship. No Worries Club, which is part of Down Under, had quite a few members in it. And I thought that we could share ideas about Down Under horsemanship through the podcast. I thought it would be just a small group of people, and I actually called it the podcast. Down Under Horsemanship is DUH, and did that for the first 45, 50 episodes or something. And had a lot of the members of the No Worries Club members. I tried to get some of the professional clinicians on. Even though I said I wasn't affiliated with Down Under, people still got the impression that I was. And Clinton emailed me and said, "Hey, can you change the name of your podcast?" And then it opened me up to other guests. I got to have Baxter Black on. I got to have Martin Black on. Trainers like Bobby Kerr from the Mustang Million, Tom Hagwood. And then for my 100th episode, I got to have Clinton on. So I interviewed him for my 100th episode.
Well, that's pretty cool. This is one of the reasons that I really wanted to get you on here, is that you have the unique experience of having had many discussions with many different horsemen, all of a pretty high level, but from a lot of different perspectives. You know, if this podcast hadn't happened for you, you might be seeing the world more through the prism of Down Under horsemanship, but you know, now your perspective is expanded. So what would you say are some of the lessons that you have learned, maybe some unexpected things that you have come across through this podcast and getting to know some of these horsemen? I know that's a very broad question. I apologize.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Are there a few things that stand out?
There are, you know, one of the things is I wasn't part of the horse world before I got a horse and started the podcast. And I didn't realize how varied the horse world was. Like you said, my intro was those RFD clinicians, and all of them were pretty similar. I just gravitated to Clinton because he kind of spoke in the way that I could understand. And he had a complete program at the time. You know, he had a groundwork program and a riding with confidence program. So I would go out and work my horse and then look at his DVDs again. But one of the things I liked about Clinton, he says, you're not going to use me when you get more advanced. You're going to go off and you're going to learn stuff beyond what you learn here. And I took that to heart. So when I went out and started looking at other trainers, they showed me different techniques. And every clinic that I went to and every discipline that I tried through the podcast, I learned something. So we did working equitation, and I interviewed the trainer, and I went to a working equitation clinic, and I got to see how they do things. And we did the EXCA, the Extreme Cowboy Race, and I got to see how they did things and how to try to work a horse fast and whether I liked it or not. We got to do a ton of trail classes and obstacles. So each time I did something, I learned another aspect of horsemanship, and it takes a long time. Learning about horses is a lifelong experience, and I started it 2/3 into my life. So, you know, it's like drinking water out of a fire hose. You feel like you got to try and catch up. And the podcast was really instrumental in helping expose me to people that I wouldn't normally have been exposed to.
So is there a particular memorable guest or shocking sort of a moment where you ask a question and you got a response you really didn't see coming or anything like that?
Well, you know, the interview with Clinton was probably the most bizarre experience that I've had in the podcast. I got his DVDs in 2006, let's say. But I would I watch these DVDs over and over again, and I'd try something on my horse, and then I'd go back and watch the lesson again. It became so natural for me to go out and go, okay, here's what I'm doing. And Clinton would be in my head telling me what I would be doing groundwork wise or riding wise or whatever I was doing with my horse. I'd have Clinton's voice in my head. So then on the 100th episode, I actually get him on the phone and I'm talking to him, and it's like, oh my God, you know, this is the real guy. This, you know, I told him, I said, this is surreal. I've had your voice in my head for so long that talking to you for real was just bizarre, you know, because he was saying things that he didn't say on the tape, you know. I just had these phrases in my head, you know, it's squeeze, cluck, and spank, you know, and he was he was giving me actual answers to questions. So that was pretty bizarre. That make sense?
Yes, sir. No, it totally does. I've had multiple experiences with clinicians where you've known about them for years, and then you have the opportunity to actually meet them, and it's always interesting. Sometimes they don't necessarily live up to what you thought they were, and other times they're even more than what you thought they were. So it's always a learning experience, though. So now you are starting to show your mare some. You're doing some ranch riding stuff, and tell us a little bit about that. How is walking through that entry gate going for you? You finding that a new challenge? Was it what you thought it would be?
One of the reasons that I started showing was because I wanted to advance my horsemanship. For 17 years, I'd ridden strictly in a snaffle, and people said, you gotta move up, and and I really didn't feel that I had to. But when I started showing ranch in a snaffle bit, I'd look around and I'd see all these guys riding one-handed, and I'd say, yeah, that is a more skilled horse. And one of the reasons that I had avoided moving out of the snaffle is because I didn't understand bits. I had gone to several different seminars, but never really understood what difference the bits were. And I really didn't understand how to transition from one bit to another. I'd already gotten myself in trouble with Scratch for trying to use a hackamore that I didn't really know how to use. I was almost paralyzed by not knowing which bit to use next. And after you contacted me for the podcast and let me watch your more about bits and bitting, I began to get a feeling that, hey, I think I can make a transition to one hand. And you were pretty instrumental in that. It's a 5-hour video that you watch, but you learn how bits work. And now I'm starting to ride both horses in a Billy Allen bit, and they seem to be much happier. And from that, I'm learning how little a cue I can make to get the horse to do what I want him to do. Where with the snaffle, you're kind of just pulling them around sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. It's amazing how sensitive they can be, but it takes a lot of work to get there, for sure.
Yeah, and they talk about feel and timing all the time with horsemanship. I was mostly working on my timing, but I really didn't have the concept of feel. And I think part of that feel concept is asking the horse in the most softest, politest way first. That doesn't mean you're going to get the answer you want, but let them know that danger's not coming if they don't do what you want. But you can get them to do a lot more with that stuff.
One of the things I notice a lot as I travel around and do clinics, there are a lot of horses out there that flinch every time the rider moves the reins. And people are generally not aware of that. If I were to video something and slow it down, you might catch the look in their eye or so forth. But people really, really do need to be aware of how sensitive horses can be and all the doors that opens up, but also the pitfalls that makes possible when you go a little too fast or you grab them a little too hard and so forth. It changes the dynamic for sure. Well, John, it is time for us to get to the sponsor of this episode, and this is a returning sponsor. They were very pleased with the response we got from the last advertisement, so they decided to do another episode. So
I love these.
This episode is sponsored by the American Society Simplifying and Exemplifying Sarcasm, or ASES. Did you know that 80% of Americans rate as subfluent in sarcasm? As an aside, 78.34% of statistics are totally made up. Anyway, at the American Society Simplifying and Exemplifying Sarcasm, we know that you are smart enough to tell the obvious from the obviously wrong. Heck, we even promise to definitely help you to recognize hyperbole and to stop using the word literally when you really mean figuratively. Recognize when other people are being humorous in your presence from now on. At ASSES, we've even seen a strong correlation between people learning to read when others are being disingenuous and voting better. Join our movement today and become a fellow ass.
That's a great sponsor, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you. They were tailor-made for me, let me tell you. So I've also seen through your social media and stuff that you have started giving back to the community that you have learned so much from. And you are now helping out with some kids and doing some clinics of your own and so forth. So how has that been going for you?
That's been a lot of fun. I help out at a junior rodeo, and it's pretty much just being the ground team. I do have a couple of people that have asked me to help them with their horsemanship. At first, I was very reluctant. I'd never considered myself an official trainer at that point. And these folks were basic beginners, and they needed help with working their horses. They really needed help with how they perceive their horses, because I think so many beginning horse people get into it because they think they're going to have this wonderful relationship with their horse, much like a dog. So they start giving them treats, and they start loving all over them, and pretty soon the horses are walking all over them, and they can't figure out why they're not reciprocating their love. And so I've been helping a couple of people with that type of horsemanship. I'm not doing a lot of maneuver training. I'm just showing people the best way, I think, of how they should interact with their horse on a daily basis. And one of the things that's helped me with the most is seeing the different horses. It's hard to learn horsemanship with just interacting with one horse. Now I get to see the personality of 3 or 4 horses and learn from them. Not everything works on each horse, which probably is second nature. But I thought, hey, I did it with Jesse. Why isn't this horse doing this? Or I did it with Scratch. Scratch has a great lead change, but why can't this horse have a great lead change? That's the biggest learning thing that I think has come about from that.
Yes, sir. We're always looking to put more tools in our toolbox. One of the things that Claire Dupuy said that I really liked was that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
And there's a lot of truth to that. The more tools you can get figuratively in your toolbox, the more options you have whenever you come across one of those oddball horses or you hit a brick wall. And a lot of times the oddball horses that you wake up at 2:00 in the morning thinking about, they're the ones that you wind up learning the most from, because you really have to break things down and dissect them and figure out what they really mean. One of the things I'll say there is, like, it's pretty common for lead changes to be one of those areas where riders plateau. I find a lot of people start trying to teach their horse lead changes and all of a sudden realize that they don't really feel leads nearly as well as they thought that they did. And it's also pretty common when you start trying to teach the counter canter to realize that you thought your horse really understood the cue for the left lead, and he really has been understanding to lope on the lead that's to the inside of the arena all this time. And all of a sudden, when you start asking for the counter canter, some bad things can happen, and a lot of confusion and frustration can show up. So sometimes it's all about really defining what it is that we've been working on here. And I think a lot of times people aren't as aware of that as they should be. But
right.
It's all a learning process. I'm going to ask you another one of these big, hairy, abstract questions, but again, with your experience of going through this learning process and ability to speak with all these different high-level horsemen, what does the term horsemanship really mean to you? What does that encompass?
For me, horsemanship is all about that connection that you have with your horse, but it's a connection through, it sounds very kind of mystical, but it's the connection that you can make by using the horse's language to understand you. So I don't want the horse to react to my language to him. I want to figure out what he needs to hear from me to do a maneuver. And that is the softest touch that you can get away with. It also means how to build that trust within that horse. And even though if a horse isn't that trusting, Scratch isn't that trusting of a horse. But over the years, I've been able to kind of build that up. So I think that's what horsemanship means to me. And it's your skill level, and it's not getting frustrated with them when they don't understand. And it's making sure you take care of them when when their feet need to be done or their pens need to be cleaned. That's all part of horsemanship too.
I like that. I like that a lot. I really like the way you started talking about language, because I think that's a very good way to think about it. If you wind up in a foreign country and you're not fluent with the language, your communication is going to take a long time, and it's going to be frustrating for both parties, and you're going to be very limited on what you can do. But kind of like a higher level horseman that can come up to a totally strange horse and within 5 minutes have a rapport built. If you're fluent in French and you go to France, you're probably going to not have a whole lot of trouble getting exactly what you need quickly, easily, and so forth. So there's a very good correlation there between language and horsemanship. I like that a lot.
And you remember, I think we're of an age where we would have these old movies where the English guy is in France and he asks the French person a question in English, and the French person looks at him puzzled. And the only option for the English speaking person is to say the question only louder, like he was deaf, but not understand. It's not that he didn't understand the language, but that he was deaf.
Start using your hands a little more.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But you keep repeating yourself in a language that they can't understand, and you expect that they're going to absorb it just through osmosis. And that's not how it works.
Yes, sir. Yes. Well, the final question that I have for you is, what does success in the horse world look like to you?
I'm a little bit different in a lot of respects, I think. When I show in the open class. I realize I'm a very competitive person. I don't have a chance to win the open class. So it takes that off the table. These guys that I ride against are very, very good. And so that means the only person I can compete with is me, my skill with my horse. And I want my riding with a horse to be like a dance where I can guide that horse around an arena or over a trail or through some obstacles. And you can't tell that we're doing anything, that you can't see the movements that I'm making, and we're working as one. And I think to me, that's what success in horsemanship is.
I like it very much so. Yes, sir. I tell people a lot of times to watch horsemen that you admire, and you'll almost notice, regardless of discipline, that they're always at that level where it barely looks like they're doing anything ever. And conversely, when we have novice horse people, some of them I would describe as using the reins kind of like they just rode through a spider web, where they're swatting their hands. So there's a big dip for you. If you're using your hands like you rode through a spider web, you might want to head in the direction of all those good horsemen and try subtle, very, very, very subtle hand gestures and see if that works for you a little bit better.
So. I came across a Sarah Dawson video from this 2017 Snaffle Bit Futurity. She was riding in a hackamore, and I was stunned by how little her hands moved through the whole reining run. It was incredible. I don't know how she was able to ride that so quietly. It's like she was on a magic carpet. It was so smooth. And if anybody wants to watch that video, it's on YouTube. It's just amazing to see her ride.
Yes, sir. It's a good thing. I know some people are very discipline specific. I'm a lot more general, but I think that good horse people always recognize and appreciate other high level riders, even in other disciplines and so forth, whether it's dressage or reining or working equitation. Those guys really impress me. I love watching the working equitation stuff.
Right.
So you can always tell the good ones.
That translates into what we do mostly is trail ride. And it does translate into trail riding if you can guide your horse down the trail, and we try to find different things and different challenges out there to do. And doing them in arena gives you that environment to learn them in, and so that when you go out on the trail, you're able to get things done.
I think the trail is a very underutilized arena for training a horse. I really, really do. And even set up trail obstacles, as far as if you think of cross training a horse or whatever, there's really no discipline that I can think of where furthering control of horses' individual feet won't help you. And obstacles give you a very tangible way to help work on that stuff, where it's pretty obvious when your left hind keeps banging into the side of the bridge that you need to pick that one up higher to step on there. And you can really have some fantastic light bulb moments with your horse on trail obstacles. I think that's an underutilized tool out there for people of any discipline. And it also gets you out of the arena and lets your horse decompress a little bit and so forth. So one of my pet peeves with the horse world is when you get a show horse and then you try to take him out in the pasture and he's completely lost, and you realize that they've never taken this thing out of the arena.
Right.
That just infuriates me to no end every time I come across it.
There was a trainer I was watching, and unfortunately I don't remember his name. It was a long time ago. It was Equine Affair used to come out to Pomona, and I'd volunteer each year to go be the ground crew or whatever. And there was a guy in the back arena who was saying, you want to know when your horse picks up his right front or his left. You want to know which foot the horse is moving. And I'm going, I mean, I was new to this, so new, so green. I was like, there's no way you can tell which foot the horse is. That's how green I was. But it did later come down to the line going, yeah, I should be able to control each of the 4 feet of my horse independently. Now, just because I can't do it doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's certainly something to aspire to. And I keep working at it. Someday I'll get it.
Yes, sir. I can remember a farrier was telling me one time, this was when I was pretty green in the deal and was kind of learning my leads. He could feel at the trot whether a horse was going to take the correct lead or not. And I remember sitting there nodding and smiling at him, but in my head, I was calling bullshit on this. So this was no way that was possible. And now it's so obvious that it absolutely is that. So we all have those moments. Nothing wrong with that.
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Something that I've come across with the horsemen that really know their stuff, the guys that are fairly advanced, when they go to teach somebody, I think it's called expert bias, is that they know how to do something so well, and they've been doing it for so long that they find it difficult to teach. Do you know what I'm saying? Is that
No, absolutely. Yes, sir. So how do I overcome that?
Yeah.
So I would say that the skills of being good with horses and the skill of being good with people are really 2 totally different skills. And so for the last, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 years or whatever, that I've been working with people more, I've really studied more on the people side than I have on the horse side, and really concentrated more on that. And so I really do spend a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to break various topics down into smaller digestible parts. There is always a balance there. Like, for instance, if you're doing a clinic and you have 12 people, you will never have 12 people that are all on the same level. You're always
Right.
going to have two or three that are much greener than the rest and one or two that are much more advanced than the rest. That's more the challenge to me, is how to talk to the group where you don't lose the bottom end and you don't bore the top end.
Right. Right.
um,
I've been at both ends of those clinics.
Really taking everything and breaking it down into the individual parts. I always try to define the independent parts. A lot of times, like with bits, for instance, one of the things you might have noticed in the video is I don't use the names for the bits very often. I'm more just showing you this mouthpiece. And the reason for that is that as I've talked with so many people about bits, you come to realize that using a word like Tom Thumb does not mean that it doesn't pull up the same picture in everyone's head. And so when someone uses a name like that, I always then ask them to describe the bit to me. And it may seem like I don't know what I'm talking about at that point, but the reality is I've dealt with 25 people that had a radically different idea what that bit was, and I want to make sure we're on the same page. So I think that's a really important step, is making sure that we are on the same page and we're defining this as this, because certain disciplines do have different ways of describing the same thing. I'm kind of always mystified when I study dressage. It seems like they go through the most complicated way possible to describe a simple action that they can come up with. I understand what you're talking about, but for the life of me, why would you have described it that way? That just made it way harder for everybody to understand. And then the other part of it is I just check in with the people and I'm looking them in the eye and, hey, do you understand what I just said? Do I need to say that a different way, or did I get through? I don't know how successful that I really am. I feel like I'm fairly successful with it, but the skill of explaining things to people is, I find, far more important than the horse part of it. I am sometimes, do I want to publicly say this or not?
Say it.
I don't think you really have to be that great of a horseman to be successful in the teaching part of it. I have been, like, I had the MC in Expo with two professionals riding in it that I had heard of beforehand and so forth, but had never personally seen them ride. And when I personally saw them ride, I was shocked. They were way greener than I was expecting them to be. Both of them were. And that was a big bucket of cold water on my face, in that the general public cannot watch two riders and tell whether one is really an expert or one is just kind of mediocre. Because I would say both of these people were more in the mediocre camp, but they are esteemed to be experts. I mean, the lady was looking down at her horse's shoulder to tell if she was on the correct lead the whole expo. That's basic. I mean, that's not, you shouldn't be nearly to the point where you can't feel that and be riding in public showing people things, but that's where we were. So anyway, the skill of describing it to people is the much harder skill. That's what I concentrate more on than the horse part of it. The horse part, by and large, is the easy part in what I do.
Right. Okay, now a horse question. And I've told you about Scratch, and I take responsibility for everything he doesn't do well, just as much as I take responsibility for the good things that he does. So we're trying to do some arena riding, and I need him to do 3 circles in a rating pattern. Maybe it was because all the arena riding I did while I was training him, or that he's a Mustang and doesn't really see much point in riding in a circle around our arena. But trying to keep him in a lope for those 3 circles has really been a challenge. How do I motivate him? I don't think a riding crop is, I don't have any adverse reasons for not using one, but I don't think that's going to convince him that I want him to continue loping. And I'll tell you what I have been doing more recently is that when I take him out on the trail, I do a lot of loping on the trail wherever we can. There's a lot of gopher holes, but whenever I can, I do some free loping where he's loping out in the open, so that when I do take him in the arena, I'm hoping that he's more comfortable doing that. Have you got any pointers that might help me get him a little more motivated to lope in the arena?
First of all, I would encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. That was the first thing I was going to say. If I have a horse that is a little lazy in a confined area, then the first thing I want to do is take them out of the confined area and lope in a big pasture or something like that. And usually they're a lot more easy to get to move out in a larger area. And once they get a little more comfortable with that, you can bring them back to the arena or the more confined area, and a lot of that will carry over.
Okay.
One other thing I might ask you about is like what does he do when you are loping him around? Is he just breaking down to a trot, or does he try to stop completely, or how severe is he trying to get out of it, I guess? Okay. Well, we were in the midst of talking about your horse not wanting to keep loping for very long, and I think I was asking you what he does. Does he just break down to a trot, or does he try to stop completely? More or less, how significant is the refusal at this point?
As we go around, he'll just break down into a trot. A lot of times he'll just break down into a trot in the back, and he'll continue to try and lope in the front. And that makes for a very rough ride.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and tell you behaviorally how I would deal with that, but because he's doing it that way, that actually makes me suspicious that he may have a pain issue somewhere, because it's kind of unusual for them to just drop out in the hind. So, and I would also ask now, is that more pronounced one direction than the other?
Yes, it's a little bit more pronounced to the right.
Okay. So like that could be a stifle or hock issue, as well as some other things. So the simplest thing to do is, will he trot with you, like leading him along?
Yes.
Have you ever done a flexion test on a horse?
I've seen it done a number of times.
That might be something to try. If basically you're going to take one back leg and pick it up and you're going to flex it, you want to hold the hoof so that you flex every joint in the leg from the fetlock all the way up to the hip, and hold it up pretty high for 30 seconds, and then try to have him trot straight out of it. And you do that to both legs and see if there's any asymmetry. So if he does have some joint pain in a hind leg, that'll tell on him pretty quickly.
Okay.
Training wise, assuming that he doesn't have any pain, we just talked about taking him into a larger area. I would also really try to develop the long trot on him. My suspicion is you probably have a hard time keeping him at the long trot as well. Is that correct?
Yes. His extended trot is not too bad. I can keep him in a trot for a while, but when he wants to stop, he wants to stop.
Yes, sir. So most of the time when people have this issue, what they really have is an issue with kind of the upper end of the RPM gauge, and they just tend to notice it at the lope. But seldom do I find someone who has a good easy lope on their horse and also doesn't have a good extended trot. So I would work that extended trot quite a bit, and it seems a little counterintuitive, but it is actually easier for a horse to do a short lope or a nice easy little canter than it is to do an extended trot. And so that can be one of the ways that you start rewarding him. You push the long trot, and then to reward the long trot, you let him go up into the lope and kind of keep the canter. This is one of the tricks that they do on the racetrack. The pony horses will often canter, and then they make the horse they're ponying the long trot. And the pony horse can do multiple horses at that little canter while wearing them out at the long trot. Does that make sense?
It does. When you say, just to make sure I have it right, when you say long trot, that is an extended trot?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
What I find is that most people's extended trot is about 60% of what the horse is physically capable of. And it's a really, really good thing to try to push that line as far as you can. Okay. It's great for stretching a horse out and really physically warming them up. A long trot uses more muscles than the lope does, so you have more blood flow to more actual muscles, and it's also a symmetric gait. One of the things I learned when I was doing cutting horses, we stopped loping the horses in circles to warm them up, and we started long trotting them, and our hock injections went down about 75%.
Oh, wow.
And you think all of the wear and tear on the hocks was from all the stops and turns, but that would tend to suggest that it was actually all the circles we were loping that was having that effect. So I much prefer the long trot for warming a horse up. I think it's a highly underutilized gait. You can really get them loose and kind of relaxed and floppy, and they get their head real level and they really get to stretching out. And when you can get that done, then I would about promise you that your loping problem is going to just magically disappear without really having worked on it at all. And also, I know you're showing in ranch riding and stuff, and that's one of the gaits that you want to show. And I've judged some of those things a lot of times. Again, the difference between their working trot and their extended trot is like 10%. It's barely at all. If you have a horse that really can extend out, that's going to, change things for you on that scorecard as well.
It's like you're watching me from Louisiana, Dan. That's exactly what happens to me.
But I would, because he tends to drop out in the hind and try to continue in the front, that's not typical. So that does make me a little suspicious that he could have some pain somewhere. And that could be anything from kissing spine or ulcers to, like I say, hocks or stifles. Because it's asymmetric, in other words, you said he was a little worse to the right than the left. That makes me a little more suspicious of a stifle problem than anything else, to be honest. And stifle problems often are muscular in nature. So there's a tendon there that holds the patella. That's the true knee of the horse. A lot of times, if you'll do some hills or some ground poles with a horse, a lot of stifle problems can be dealt with that way without real surgical intervention. Now, of course, that's dependent upon the nature of the injury there.
Right.
But I've seen a lot of stifle problems that were solved by exercise. So
cool.
Anyway, those might be some things I would try.
I'll give it a go.
Another thing you have the opportunity with there is while you're long trotting, I really like to see people take their rein hand and really slide it all the way up the horse's neck as far as they can reach. I really like to think of that sort of like your pelvis is like the throttle on a boat.
Mm-hmm.
So when my hand goes way up here, it's a very clear signal. I also tend to post the long trot and I sit everything else. So again, it becomes a pretty clear signal to the horse that this is what we're working on here. And you'll even find a lot of horses that tend to be really high-headed when you get them into that good long trot and they get relaxed and in the groove. Their head will tend to come way down. They get pretty level for the most part when they're doing that. So I think it's a highly underutilized gait. And once again, if he's really putting the effort in there, it'll actually be easier for him to roll up into the canter. That'll be a place he can rest. And then you solve your canter problem that way.
Sounds good. You don't think of it exactly like that. You think, well, the lope's got to be more work, but I see what you mean by that extended trot.
I really like to think of it as the RPM gauge. So like each gait would have 3 gears, a low, a medium, and a high, sort of. And anytime we're in that high gear, even if it's at a walk, that's really going to require some effort on the animal's part. And I feel like people don't tend to work on things that way. I seldom work on the middle. I always work on the edges. I try to push the RPMs as high as I can, and then I try to work on the low end and get them to go as slow as I can, and really kind of develops that boat throttle sort of mentality off of my pelvis and so forth. If you can keep yourself from overusing your hands and numbing them to the bridle in the process of that, you will get to that Sarah Dawson mode that you were talking about earlier, where she's riding her horse with her seat and all of the cues are almost imperceptible. That faster, slower deal is a huge aspect of really getting a horse tied to your seat. So,
right.
Yeah, I might have gone off in the weeds on you a little bit there.
No, you didn't.
Anyway.
I'm soaking it in, Dan.
Yes, and I'm not saying you might not ever have to use a bridle rein on his butt or a crop like you were talking about, But if you just took that long trot and you worked at it and you kind of had that 1% change every day, in a month, you'd go from 60% of what he can do to 90% of what he can do.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the way I would look at it. I might just put the lope on the back burner for a little while until I had that a little more developed. And I have a sneaking suspicion that when you develop that long trot a bit more, that lope problem is just going to magically melt away.
So, sounds good. I'll report back to you.
So that sounds excellent. Did you have any other questions for me or anything?
No, I think that'll do it. I'll have some questions for you down the road here as I progress through this.
I did have one other question for you that I try to ask everybody, and I had forgotten to ask you earlier, but you obviously are an avid learner still with regard to horsemanship and all. Are there any resources that you would point any people to, any avenues where you have found some good nuggets of knowledge that you might share?
I think that you want to have as basic of a knowledge as possible. So when I first started the podcast, I remember telling people, if you were as green as I was, that's the first caveat. If you were as green as I was and you were starting in horses, and a lot of people do that, is that to find a program that will take you from point A to about 60% of competence, and follow that program. Don't go bouncing around too much. So if you get Chris Cox's program, do that. If you get Clinton's program, follow that, and try and do it in the steps that they provide you. Don't go to the disc number 3 of Clinton and start there. Start at base 1 and learn all the basics first. I think so many people forget the basics and then they move on. I do now use a lot of YouTube videos, and I watch a lot of different things, but in kind of a different way. I'm looking for a little bit of a technique. For example, I'm trying to figure out how to spin. So I watched your YouTube video on spinning, and then I watched Matt Mills, and then I watched about half a dozen others. And they were all using the same basic technique, but they explained it in a different way. And each time I got it explained to me over a period of a couple of months, it started to make sense. So I do think that if you're going to advance your horsemanship, you need to continually be learning from everybody. You might not like what they're doing then. It might make sense to you down the road. It might be something that you just kind of discard, but try to look at what everybody's doing and pick out the things that appeal to you and incorporate them into your program. I guess I'm long-winded today. I don't know what you bring out in me. But that's what I would recommend.
Okay. Well, very good. Yeah, I think video is a fantastic, both watching other people on it and videoing yourself. I think it's one of the greatest resources that we have to date, really and truly. So, do you ever video yourself riding? Do you get your wife to video you? Or I just saw on YouTube you had released one of your ranch riding excursion there. Do you do a lot of watching yourself ride?
I do, especially when I was riding Scratch. I did that on a very regular basis to kind of see what I was doing. And it is extremely helpful. If you want your horse to improve, you have to improve as a rider. And my wife has helped me a lot. She'll watch me and see things that I don't realize that I'm doing. My elbows flopping, my hands moving too much, my legs gripping the barrel of my horse, and those types of things. And a lot of times when you're doing that, you need to be told or reminded that you're making those mistakes over and over again, so that when you're riding, you can do the right method long enough for it to become habit. And I think videotape is the best. And one other point on that is that we really live in a golden age of horsemanship right now. With all the information that's out there, I couldn't imagine doing horsemanship 50 years ago when there just wasn't all this resource. I mean, where did you go? And I really think horsemanship has come a long way in the 20 years that I've been around it. And I'm excited for the future of it because I think it's just going to get better.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm reluctant to go much farther and risk a fourth technical issue this morning. So I guess we should probably wrap it up there. But John, I appreciate your patience this morning with all the problems we've had and your willingness to come on and let me interview you. It's been a good conversation, and I appreciate your time and your insight.
My pleasure, Dan. And every problem that we've had today, I've had at some point in one of my podcasts or another. They just all kind of piled up on us this morning.
It happens. It's Friday the 13th for me, I guess. But anyway, so, well, thank you again, John. And everybody, you definitely should check out John's podcast, the Whoa podcast, about horses and horsemanship. I will put a link to it in the show notes and everything. He really does have a good podcast, and I listened to a bunch of them. I haven't gotten back to his earlier ones yet, so I'll have to go and look for some of those people that you mentioned today. But it's definitely worth your time, and he has some pretty interesting stories and so forth. I really enjoyed, I don't know if it was your last one or your second to last one, but Bill Ince, the judging.
Oh, yes.
One, I thought that was a fantastic one. I enjoyed it quite a bit. So everybody check Mr. John out and get some stuff from him too. So
thanks so much, Dan.
Okay. Thank you, John. That's been another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate your time.